So just explain why the screening was carried out.
Well, we're determined to make sure that only people who deserve to carry the badge and wear the uniform do so. There have been a number of quite concerning cases over recent years. So we were determined to make sure that we'd looked under every stone, we'd shone a light into every corner. And that's why we commissioned about a year ago this screening of every single police officer and member of police staff and special constable, everybody working in the policing system, over 300,000 people, to check all of the databases and make sure that nothing had been overlooked. That exercise was completed and the results were announced today. And as Chief Constable Serena Kennedy said in your clip there were 461 officers out of the 300,000 who needed further investigation, of which 9 merited criminal investigation. So I think it's important we take action in those cases, but we should also keep in mind that means that in 99.85% of cases there was no new information uncovered. So we should keep in mind that the vast majority of officers are brave, dedicated and hard-working, but where their conduct doesn't meet the high standards the public rightly expect, we will take action.
Do you think it sounds a bit complacent, from you, but also, as you said, Chief Constable Serena Kennedy? Oh, it's great, only a small number of people have committed crimes before and were sort of let through. I mean, most people would say, hang on a minute, how on earth is someone a serving police officer or a member of the police who this has happened to?
Yeah,
None of them have criminal investigations.
One is one too many. So we're making a number of changes. So the first thing we're doing is we're funding the police force to continue doing these checks on an ongoing basis. That's the first thing. We're also changing the rules around dismissals to give chief constables like Serena Kennedy more power to dismiss officers where misconduct issues arise. We're changing the rules to make sure that the vetting status has to be held on a continuous, ongoing basis. So we're really raising the standards across the board to make sure the public can have confidence, which they rightly expect.
We've had, as you said, lots of stories in recent years, from the awful case of Sarah Everard to WhatsApps being released showing a pretty misogynistic or racist attitudes among the police. I'm interested on your perspective, because you're policing minister, you've been out meeting police. Do you think there is a cultural problem in police?
So I think in some areas there is, but we're determined to deal with that, to root it out. Chief constables are determined to as well. And this, data washing exercise, looking at over 300,000 people, is designed to do that, to make sure that standards are met, not just mostly, but always.
Why do you think this culture has been allowed to grow? Do you think it's because some people are attracted to the police for the wrong reasons? Do you think it's because they're, looking after their own, it hasn't been properly dealt with in the past? Well,
I think there's an element of both of those things. When you get small groups of people who work together in difficult circumstances, sometimes you get cultures, sort of insular cultures forming. But I think it is worth just emphasising to the public and to police officers watching, the vast majority of officers are decent, brave and hard-working. But in these small minority of cases, we're determined to have zero tolerance. Because if someone's wearing the uniform, they're able to they've got a power of arrest, they're wearing the badge. We do want the very, very high standards. Those haven't always been met in the past, but with initiatives like this, not just a one-off data washing exercise, but doing this on an ongoing, continuous basis, I think should give the public a lot more confidence going forward that these issues have been gripped.
OK. We've been talking on the programme about the pressures on local councils. We've seen several councils going bust. We just heard from a Lib Dem and a Conservative councillor talking about unsustainable funding pressures. They need help, they say, from the government. Is that help coming?
Well, first of all, a couple of points. Firstly, last year, council funding went up by, I think, about 5 billion or around about 10%. Next year, it's going up by, I think, about 4 billion.
What about costs,
Let me finish. So over 2 years, that's a 16.5% increase in the funding available to councils. That's quite a big increase. On some of the councils that have gone bankrupt, one of which, by the way, is Croydon, the borough that I represent.
I am going to come in then, if I may, because just to comment on the figures, because I accept your point that funding's gone up, but pressures have gone up too, right? Inflation pressures. They're talking there about the pressure on housing, 49p in every pound spent in Eastbourne Council on temporary housing. So you can't just look at these figures in isolation.
Yeah, 16.5% over 2 years is broadly the same as inflation over that same period. There certainly are pressures with housing, temporary housing, that the Eastbourne leader referred to that do need to be addressed. But on some of those councils that went bust, one of which was the council I represent in Parliament, Croydon, which under its previous Labour administration went spectacularly bankrupt, like other councils such as Slough. Now, the reason for that wasn't government funding. It was because the Labour administration in those two councils speculated. Hang on, let me finish. Speculated recklessly with public money. They bought a hotel that went bankrupt. They bought a shopping centre. They wasted £90 million refurbishing the Fairfield halls that barely looked any different afterwards. That wasn't, an accident. It wasn't government funding. It was the incompetence of that Labour administration in Croydon. The same happened in Slough. Birmingham, the example you showed, there was some enormous court case they lost to do with underpaying female workers that cost them hundreds of millions of pounds. So if you look at some of those individual councils, there are stories of bad government, bad management, certainly the case in Croydon, which explain the bankruptcy. But look, I know...
So is that the message then? Incompetent councils, and actually you've had loads of money recently, so, I think that's
not quite what I said, is it? I think some of those examples, like Croydon and Slough, certainly are bad management locally. But look, I know that Michael Gove and the team in Dealer, will always listen to council leaders and engage closely to make sure...
And Conservative MPs, 44 of them, are saying that you need to stump up more money.
Look, Michael Gove's a very reasonable cabinet minister. As you know, he will always listen to local authority leaders.
He's worried as well, apparently.
And members of parliament.
OK. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the attacks on the Houthis as well, something that the Prime Minister has been speaking about today in the House of Commons. I guess my question is, what's the end game here? Is it to keep bombing the Houthis until they don't exist anymore, or until we kind of cross their fingers and say that, they're going to stop attacking us? What's the end game? Well,
I mean, the principal objective is a limited and precise objective, which is to stop the Houthis attacking civilian shipping going through those straits, the Red Sea. Right, that's the shipping, civilian shipping, many different countries involved. They must stop attacking those civilian ships. And the purpose of the action that the Americans have taken, that we've taken, supported by many other countries as well, is to prevent those attacks. So our message to the Houthis is stop attacking shipping in the Red Sea, and then the attacks on their military bases will stop as well. It's very simple, very straightforward.
But what if they don't listen?
Well, then, in that case, the military action that we and the Americans and others are taking is designed to degrade their military capability to the point that they can't launch attacks anymore. They've got missile launching sites, they've got military facilities. We're targeting those, and the intention is to ultimately put them out of action if the Houthis don't desist. And if they're put out of action, they won't be able to attack innocent civilian shipping anymore. OK. Now, there's just one final thing I wanted to talk to you about, and it's something that we covered on the show last night. It was basically from some... the rape campaigners, Rape Crisis and other women's groups who are saying that they want an amendment to the Victims Bill because at the minute, if you report a rape and your counselling notes can then be requested by the court. So they're saying that this is, very difficult for victims and survivors of rape to know that what they say in these very, very vulnerable moments, that could then potentially be used against them in a court of law. Is that something that you think should be looked at? Well, we do need to consider that very carefully and very sensitively. Rape conviction rates are, frankly, too low. Police referrals to the CPS have gone up by 134% in the last 4 years, but it is still too low, so more needs to be done. Victim confidence, in particular, is something we need to work on. That sort of very personal information that you just mentioned should only be looked at by a court when strictly necessary. There are already quite a few controls over that disclosure, but I'm sure ministers in the Ministry of Justice will consider these requests very carefully because we do need to make sure, of course, justice needs to be done. Information the court needs to see to reach a fair verdict does need to be disclosed. But when it comes to this very sensitive personal information, that should only be disclosed and used where necessary. And we need to make sure the rules do reflect that.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Chris Philp, thank you.